Everything this weekend is drawing our gaze and our attention to the cross of Christ. So yesterday we celebrated September 14th is the feast of the exaltation of the cross, when St. Helena found the true cross of Christ. And the day after that, September 15th today, we always celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. She who suffered with Christ by remaining at the foot of the cross and experiencing all his pain through compassion. And it's just providential in the fact that all the readings today in an ordinary Sunday Mass speak to us about the nature of the cross in the Christian life. And the first thing I want to bring up in that fact is that sometimes people think it's a choice between suffering with Christ or pleasure with the world. That's the farthest thing from the truth. Jesus Christ did not bring the cross to the world. Jesus Christ came to reveal how we should see the cross that was already here long before he got here. The constant problem in life is, what do we do with our sufferings? What Jesus gave us was a new understanding of how we are to see the cross as we experience it in life. And St. John Henry Newman had a very beautiful reflection. It deserves to be read in whole, and I just grabbed one paragraph from that. It's the cross as the measure of the world. He says, "It is but a superficial view of things to say that this life is made for pleasure and happiness." Superficial. To those who look under the surface, it tells a very different tale. The doctrine of the cross does but teach, though infinitely more forcibly, the very same lesson which the world teaches to those who live long in it, who have experienced it, who know it. The world is sweet to the lips, but bitter to the taste. It pleases at first, but not at last. It looks happy on the outside, but evil and misery lie concealed within. When a man has passed a certain number of years in it, he cries out, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Therefore, the doctrine of the cross of Christ does but anticipate for us our experience of the world. The world is the cross, and no one escapes the cross. What Jesus brought was a new vision, and yet we'd even say a new demand as his followers of how we are to understand the cross. And that is the ultimate message of Christianity. That if we embrace our sufferings, if we take the things that seem to be the obstacle in our path, the irremovable pains in our life, and we take that up with a willing heart and sacrifice ourselves for that, then not only will it save our souls, but it will transform us into Christ. The cross is the means of the resurrection, not just in eternity, but even here on earth. So I want to talk about three different conceptions of the cross, from the pagans, those without God, the Protestants, and the Catholics. Right? The pagans, their whole thing is eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we die. When you do not have a conception of eternal life, when you don't have an idea of something you're working for, there's nothing but the satisfaction of all my desires here and now. And a perfect display of that is the pride parades that are going on. And I don't mean to be hitting on that, but it's pretty evident, and it's only growing in our times. I mean, I thought it was concealed in June, but now we're in September, and it's still processing. And what it is it's a celebration of unfettered desire. That it's just me and what I feel is right, no matter where that takes me in life. That's why it's also expressed by a rainbow in so many different genders, because there's no satisfaction. We know that the more you try to satisfy your desires, they continue to expand. We get bored with what we've tasted, and we need new and better and different things. But the world, all it can do is try to cure us of the cross. If you're unhappy, take a pill. If you don't like your body, then change it. If If you don't like marriage, divorce. If you don't want children, contracept. If you have a desire, indulge it. The world doesn't have an answer to suffering besides flee from pain by going towards pleasure. Now we come closer to Christianity with Protestantism, but Protestants and Catholics have a very different understanding of the cross. And it's important for us to see that because we might have the same conception. And I'm talking about theologies here because we all know Protestants in our life who love Jesus very deeply, take up their cross, and we all know Catholics who have the right theology but aren't living it. So I'm talking about the theology and not individual persons. But Protestants, there is no sense of redemptive suffering. When St. Paul says, take up your cross, well, when he says that I fill in my flesh what is lacking in the passion of Christ, that I get to participate in the very sufferings of Christ for my own renewal and the salvation of others. Protestants don't have anything to do with that because what they see is Jesus suffered on the cross so we don't have to. And all that matters is my baptism or my yes to Jesus Christ, and no matter what happens after that, doesn't add or take away from my sufferings, the sufferings of the world, or the salvation of souls. So there's no meaning of suffering in Protestantism. There is no answer. With Catholicism is the belief from the very beginning, and the saints live this out the most, is that baptism is the beginning. But when I take up my cross and follow Jesus Christ and allow that to transform me, I become like Christ. We're justified in baptism, but we become divinized by our cross. That the greatest tool for my sanctification, my holiness, is actually the sufferings that I accept in my journey to be faithful to Jesus Christ. Which the reason I love our idea of that is it makes life an adventure. If what I suffer and what I do and don't do adds nothing to this world or my salvation, what's the point? The drama and the story's already been told in Christ, and we're all just bystanders off on the stage. But if what I do really matters, that Christ invites me to follow him by taking up my own cross, by living faithful to him, and the sufferings that come with that can actually transform me into Jesus Christ and help aid to the salvation of the world. It's far more potent. You know, when we were on our retreat, all the priests went to Tamarack, right, this past week for diocesan retreats. And we got there Monday evening. By Tuesday, we were all evacuated off the mountain, unfortunately. The fires were getting too close to Tamarack, and so they said everyone had to basically leave. And so I still had 2 days left on my retreat, and there's no way I was coming back here. So I decided I would go up to Moscow because Father Chase was up there, and I'm his mentor, so I thought I'd give him some time. It's the other way around. But the last thing the priest had said to us when he was giving us this retreat, he just gave us the first meditation, and he just said, I want you guys to go back to the origins of your calling, when Christ first called you. What was that like for you to receive that call and to say yes to that? And what's happened to that over the last 10, 15, 20, 50 years since your ordination, since that yes? So that was in the back of my mind. So I go up to Moscow, where everything happened in Moscow. It was when I moved out to my apartment, was going to college. That's when I had my conversion back to the faith, and everything came to me from the cross. The first time I really fell in love with Christ, when I started to devote myself to him, was when I came to understand what he suffered for me. The saints are all in agreement on this. There is no greater way to grow in love with the Lord and intimacy with him than meditating on his passion. So we can think about that. How often do I think about the sufferings of Jesus Christ, what he did for me? The first time I ever did that was in college. Biggest conversion moment of my life. But when we're introduced to what Christ suffered for us, what immediately follows that is, what can I do for you? And what are the ways that I'm running away from my own cross? And so little by little, I began to pray more and try to orient my life towards God. And at one point, I was called to be a priest. And the only thing I saw in that call to be a priest was the cross. I only saw loss, death, suffering, and losing everything that I had ever known as my life. And it was even 2 times I tried to break up with the girl I was with and follow that call, and it was just too hard. I kept going back. And it was on the feast day today of Our Lady of Sorrows. I was doing the St. Louis de Montfort consecration to Jesus through Mary. And my consecration was today. And one thing I can tell you is there's no greater individual who inspires us to be faithful to our cross than the Blessed Virgin Mary. And when we draw closer to Mary, she always draws us to Calvary with her Son, that we might be faithful in the midst of our own callings. Well, without even thinking about it, I'd pushed priesthood so far down at this point, but I went in and I made this consecration this day. I remember telling God months before, I can't be a priest. I can't say yes. I'm not strong enough. If you want this for me, you have to do it. And by the end of this night, after making this consecration, girlfriend and I broke up. I dropped out of school the next day, and I was in seminary by the end of the month. And I really devote it to Mary's intercession. But as I was walking around Moscow this past week, I was walking around like just the places that I had grown up in and lived in and where the call had come. And it was so cool for me to see this, because all I saw when Christ called me to be a priest was the cross. I only saw death and suffering. The only reason I said yes was because I felt the call. I thought, like, I just have to suffer now the rest of my life, and maybe I'll get to heaven by the end if I'm faithful to this. And now walking around 16, 17 years later now, it's like all I felt was life. And I started to see that everything that is so beautiful and good in me and in my life is because of that yes to the call. And the cross in our lives is, you think about it, horizontal and vertical lines. It's when my horizontal will intersects with God's vertical will for my life. Do I take up that cross and deny myself, or do I just go after my own will, my own way? At the beginning of our lives, especially when we're following Jesus Christ, it feels like a cross. And that's why we need to meditate on the cross, because it strengthens us to be faithful in the midst of our own sacrifices that we're being called to make. But that's never the end of the story. Jesus said today, you save your life, you lose it. But if you're willing to lose your life for my sake and the sake of the gospel, this is the promise. You will save it. You will see life, and life in abundance, if you're faithful to the cross. I was with the old heads last week, and the old heads are alumni. They're all old once you get out of college at that point. And so we were all at their house, and they wanted to depress me that night, and so rub it in my face of what's been going on. And one of them, I won't say who it was, we'll just call him Isaiah. He made a video of what the center used to be, and all the guys and the girls that were here, and all like this beautiful montage of all the fun that we used to all have together. And then each one, like a block of black goes over their eyes, says dead, dead, dead. They've all moved on. And it was funny, but I honestly almost had to step out because I was getting teary-eyed, because I miss those students so much. You know, and you know, they've gone on to do better things, you know, and screw them. I mean, bless them for that. That's a beautiful, I'm very happy for that, you know. But they all went forward. Some are in seminary now, some are in a religious life, some got married and became, and are already fathers and mothers. And it's so beautiful to see that. But each of them was confronted with the cross of letting go where they were now to step into this next stage of their life. And it really made me think about what is the trajectory of our center? Like, what makes us different than every other thing that is being offered to you in the world, in your life? Because there's not a lot of differences. We like to party like they do. We drink overage. We smoke cigars. We make great jokes, especially when I'm talking. And we watch movies. We swing dance. We do all these things. But what makes us different? It must be the cross. It must be that the fundamental orientation of my life is not for pleasure or my own fulfillment or my own happiness in the moment, but that I am looking for the cross as it is being presented to me and striving to let go of whatever I have to be faithful in following Jesus Christ. And for men and women in college, it's different. Men need to be prepared. Men need to sacrifice everything they can in their 20s to prepare themselves for their vocation in their 30s. And the great temptation of the world is play video games, watch movies, watch pornography, and just let it all pass by, and life will catch you later. Men need to be prepared to become everything you can to be a provider for your wife and children someday, or for the church. For women, it's the opposite. Women need to be protected in college. That's your cross. Because the whole world around you is going to tell you that you can go out and you can live it up and you can have these one-night stands and these parties and you can do that, and then you can go on with the rest of your life and it'll be okay. And that's not true. And I've seen enough people on the other side of college to know that what you do in college, especially as a woman, will stay with you the rest of your life. So the cross for men comes in their preparation. The cross for women comes in their protection. And it feels like a loss now either way. It feels like a death. It feels like a suffering. But if we're faithful to that, we will experience the life on the other side. And the last thing I want to say, my spiritual director says this all the time, and he'd kill me without emphasizing this, that the cross is not enough. The cross is boring. Right? Forget the cross. It's not about the cross. David Goggins, he preaches the cross really well. Stoics preach the cross really well. It's not about just suffering and denying ourselves for a greater good. It's about the man who is on the cross. That's why Jesus went to the cross, because we're already on the cross. Our life is already suffering. And the one thing that Christ did when he came into this world and took on his suffering and death is that he made it so there's nowhere in our life that we can ever go, there's nothing we can ever experience that he himself cannot find us in the midst of that and draw us through. And that's the last thing I want to challenge you with as we go into the Eucharist. Think about the greatest crosses you've suffered in your life. Those will either take you one of two ways. Our cross will either draw us deeper into intimacy with Christ, or it will harden our hearts against God. What has been your greatest suffering that you're either looking forward to in your life? Maybe it's possible a vocation, a call, the next step, or maybe it's something you've experienced in the past. But your greatest suffering, has it been the means for you of the deepest intimacy to really know who Jesus Christ is and what he has to give you in his love and redemption? I invite us to take to heart his own promise. If we lose our life now, if we take up our cross, if we're willing to die, then he will give us life, and life in abundance.